Hello and welcome to the Headache Doctor podcast. Where on this podcast, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. Now, school is starting, and today was the first day of my daughter's kindergarten class, and she was so excited. And it got me thinking about all the parents out there that are maybe worried about their kids' headaches or migraines increasing, ramping up during the school year. Or maybe you have headaches or migraines and you've been a little bit concerned of your son or daughter also popping up with headaches or migraines at some point in their life. And so what I wanted to talk about are the trends that we see in the kiddos that we have here at Novera, and talk about the types of migraines, the types of headaches that typically kids present with, and why they would present with those headaches or migraines, and then things that you can do to help mitigate it. And especially as school starts, because school is a big trigger for a lot of these kiddos, as it puts them in an environment where they're more sedentary, they're maybe looking at laptops or screens a bit more, and they're not as mobile, they're not moving as much throughout the day. And so it puts their neck physically in a position that it just takes on more stress. And so if they were already dealing with headaches or migraines, they could develop into something that's much worse. And then we have kids all the time that really were fine, and then they just have this headache out of nowhere. And so I want to dive into that and make sure the parents out there feel helped and equipped when it comes to understanding any sort of headache or migraine in their kids. So let's first start off with talking about the different types of symptoms or migraines that kids present with. Now, there's one that I've talked about, I think, relatively recently on the podcast, known as abdominal migraines. And abdominal migraine is as far as our practice, almost exclusively found in kiddos. And abdominal migraine is going to be a type of migraine where there may be some level of headache associated with it, but the primary symptom is going to be stomach pain, nausea, potentially vomiting. And kids will have maybe symptoms that it almost feels like there's the flu, or they're sick, or they're ill, they'll throw up. And it may be a regular thing, like every month. It can hit sort of at random times. And oftentimes parents will consider this initially as like, oh, my child is ill, or my child just gets sick frequently. And the child won't necessarily know how to describe it other than that. Like, oh, I have the flu, I'm feeling sick, and then they'll vomit. They might feel better after they throw up, or they might have sort of a period of time where they're feeling nauseous enough and they just can't keep any foods down. Now, what will happen is they'll search for like a solution, try to understand like, why are we getting sick all the time? And what it'll lead to is sort of this, okay, there's nothing really that's causing, like there's no virus, there's no reason for you to have this nausea outside of like, oh, you also have this headache around the time, or your neck hurts. And so they'll get the diagnosis of abdominal migraine. And abdominal migraine diagnosis is really like a lot of migraine diagnoses. It's sort of a dead end. Like it's not like, oh, yay, we found it and now we can solve the problem. It's just sort of like, okay, we packaged your symptoms into this nice little package, and we're going to basically just manage symptoms potentially. Oftentimes abdominal migraines, providers may try to go the medication route, maybe anti-nausea meds, something like that. But with kids, it's really tough to have kiddos, especially on medication. And then oftentimes it's like a regular medication, or potentially a preventative where you're taking it daily. But with kids, especially little kids like 8, 9 years old, or even younger potentially, like parents especially are sensitive to, I don't want my child on medication. And so it can be a really tough one because it's debilitating. The child's really suffering, and it's just our healthcare system doesn't have a good solution. And so when it comes to that type of migraine, if your child is dealing with stomach pain, nausea, vomiting associated with head or neck issues, and I've even had patients that just have the stomach pain and don't even have a headache or a neck problem. So it's almost as if, like, if there's ongoing stomach pain that's not solved, there's a chance that there could be a neck involvement here, especially if like specialist after specialist is unable to figure out what is going on here. Okay, so that's kind of an odd one that does show up every now and then. My hunch tells me that it's more prevalent than what we're seeing here at Novera, and these kiddos just aren't finding their way to our office. So if this describes you or describes your kiddo, or if you've if you've been diagnosed or your kiddo's been diagnosed with abdominal migraines, come see us, because we have a very good track record. I can't think of a kiddo with abdominal migraine that hasn't gotten better through our process. So then we have atypical migraine, which kind of falls under the same, just you have the symptoms outside of the head pain itself, but you just feel off. So it could be your autonomic nervous system is just sort of off, like it's ramped up, you're in fight or flight all the time, your heart's racing, you're fatigued. You don't necessarily have a headache or migraine, but you're just like something just feels off, like maybe you feel sick, lethargic, things like that. You could also have the aura, like the visual disturbance, or maybe numbness, tingling, weakness, all the things that sort of surround a migraine outside of the pain itself, and that would be known as an atypical migraine. And we've definitely seen kiddos with this presentation as well. Both abdominal migraines and atypical migraines, when we look at the neck, we see an impact on the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is what's communicating with our GI system and our stomach, and then it sort of is the communication to ramp up or down the autonomic nervous system or the parasympathetic nervous system. And so if that nerve is like physically impacted in its ability to communicate, then we can easily get into this state of my heart's racing all the time, or I have stomach pain, or I just feel off, I feel nauseous, and it can be a neck issue. And oftentimes, especially if it hasn't been solved, or a reasonable solution or answer hasn't been provided with our healthcare system, we should look at the neck for sure. Daily headaches coming out of nowhere is another big one. So we have a lot of kiddos that they may have like irregular, maybe relatively infrequent headaches, or maybe they're relatively frequent, just sort of the kid's able to deal with it. And then out of nowhere, they'll get hit with this daily headache that just is debilitating. Like they'll be in tears, can't get out of bed, like can't go to school. And we've had several kiddos that they go into the hospital, and they're in the hospital for, days, a week, like they're on IVs and strong meds and anti-nausea and all this stuff. And then they'll basically just be discharged and, follow up with your neurologist and take these medications. And the parents are like, no, like I don't want my child just stuck taking medications, and there was no answer. Like we didn't actually find anything. We did all this imaging, and there's no reason for this to be happening. And so what do we do? And we've caught several of these kiddos, and we're very thankful, because it's so tragic to see this child, elementary school, middle school, maybe even high school, that is just unable to function. I mean, these are kiddos that had vibrant, energetic lives that were involved in school activities and sports, and they just are crumbling under this pain. They're in bed all the time. They can't come out because there's bright lights, loud noises. Like they can't function. They can't do their homework. They can't look at screens. And so it's really challenging for these kiddos, and it has such an impact on the parents, and the whole family dynamic is just like these families really, really struggle. And so we love the opportunity to come alongside and help these families in particular, because of how debilitating these daily headaches can be for these kids. And with the daily headaches, one thing that's tricky and that we want to do is have early intervention, because, and I'll talk about this a little bit later, but the sooner we can get to these scenarios, the less likely someone is to go on this journey of medication. The medication itself can be, it can perpetuate the problem in a sense, like it can create a daily headache. And then we have to get off the medication, where a patient might feel like, oh, I can't get off the medication because it helped me. and it's going to be so debilitating if I get off of it. Like it can get really tricky. And so it's really important that we see these kiddos early. And oftentimes, and I don't blame parents, but it can feel like with your kid, like you want to go to the experts in neurology, and you want to go through the hospital system, and then you want to get a second opinion for neurology. And so what we found is there's people that have been told, like, oh, go to Novera by friends, by family, by, people that are kind of in the perimeter of this issue, seeing this child suffer. And there's sort of this sense of like, well, how could they help? Like it's a serious problem. I need to make sure that we're not missing something and be responsible as a parent. And the problem with that is we typically are delaying the time that we can actually intervene and treat, which makes the problem a little bit trickier. At least the treatment approach can take longer. And so, I would advise if you're in that situation, if you know someone who's in that situation, definitely encourage them and give them a sense of urgency. Now, if your son or daughter has headaches or migraines and they're in school, I can almost guarantee you that they know of other kids, that the school nurse knows of, the school nurse probably is dealing with a handful of kids on a weekly basis that are needing medication, that are calling out sick, needing to go home because they can't focus because the pain gets too bad. And especially as the school day progresses and, you hit the afternoon, you've been sitting, you've been looking at screens, you've been relatively sedentary. And so that stress that's placed through your neck and shoulders builds. And then you get to a point where the kid is like, oh man, I can't function, and I need to go home and lay down and take a nap. And so it would be interesting to see, if your child suffers with that, like they probably know a few others, or the school nurse knows of others. And this is a problem that's becoming more and more prevalent, and we'd love to be able to step in and solve this issue for these kiddos. So if you know of someone and have their contact information, send them this podcast. Because if we can start educating these families, and then they realize like, oh, wow, this is a treatable thing. And not only is it treatable, but there's a resource available that we can get real relief instead of just watching my kids suffer every week or every month or however often it is. And then they just call in sick and then come home. And then, mom or dad has to take off work or whatever it may be. But ultimately, we want these kids to not have to worry about headaches or migraines. And if you think of your own journey, a lot of people that their headaches or migraines started when they were kids, when they were in elementary school or middle school. And they'll remember very distinctly like the first time it hit them, because it's kind of this traumatic thing. And they'll remember having to miss school, and maybe there was a season where it was really a struggle. And so it's very common for people to think back on their little years and remember, man, this was such a struggle when I was in school. And so like we have just a great, there's a great need to solve this problem in our school system. And whenever we get a kiddo, we get so excited because we know that we're saving this kiddo from decades worth of headaches or migraines. But sometimes it's just, it feels like the parent knowing or having trust that, okay, this is a neck issue, and you get this in the kiddo in for treatment quickly. Usually it's like this delayed thing, and then we see the 30, 40 something year old after they've dealt with it for decades, which is wonderful. We'd love to help you then, but we'd really love to help these kiddos. And so if you're a mom and you have headaches or migraines and your kiddo's been suffering, bring them to Novera, or at least be aware of, okay, this could potentially be a neck issue, and we need to start looking at posture and get them more movement, and realize that certain activities may be a trigger or a deterrent for their neck moving the way they should. And so a couple things in that department that you want to watch out for. So trampolines are a big one. A lot of kids, really love trampolines, and I love trampolines as a kid. I frankly still love them. But the trampoline is really challenging for the neck, and especially if you got a bunch of kids bouncing, you do the double bounce thing and you're just like not able to anticipate like when you're being launched, or maybe do the like crack the egg and you're just like bouncing around and your neck's going all these different places, or you land and you kind of give yourself whiplash because your head gets thrown back. The trampoline and all the unpredictability of it is a challenging environment for kids and their necks. And so I would say, watch out for trampoline, be very cautious about it. Like if your kid just loves a trampoline and it feels like you can't avoid it, then just maybe make it a more controlled environment, like limit the chaotic games, and maybe they're just jumping by themselves or, something like that, or with someone, and they're just making sure that when they jump, they can kind of anticipate what that will look like, so their neck isn't having to get, kind of these minor whiplash injuries as they jump on the trampoline. Like I've said a few times, prolonged sitting is a big one. So if you can figure out how to get your kids standing, moving more throughout the day, especially when they come home, maybe don't jump right into homework, like go on a walk, play outside, like get them moving. Screen time is also a big one. So if they use a laptop at school or an iPad or whatever it may be, try to get them off of that when they're at home, because they're just going to be looking down at their screen. And especially if they come home and they do homework in bed and they're just like sitting on their bed and in some weird position, like looking down, that's something we've seen in a lot of kiddos. And it's a really tough posture to sustain for the neck. And so I would get your child a proper desk, potentially even a standing desk, an area where they can focus and work on their homework if they're coming home and spending an hour or two on homework every day. The other thing we look at is like if they're playing a musical instrument. Sometimes like these reed instruments or these instruments that require that are heavier, maybe they're in like marching band or something like that, and they're carrying an instrument, or maybe their instrument is in front of them and they're having to like hunch forward. So musical instruments and the postures you sustain, or the amount of effort that someone needs to like if you play saxophone and you have to, constantly be pursing your lips and blowing, like your jaw and your neck may be in a position that it just doesn't love. We've also caught things like tongue ties or airway restrictions when people are playing instruments, and it just sort of exacerbates that tension that they're carrying because of that problem. And so playing a musical instrument, it's not like you can't play a musical instrument, but it's just, again, be aware of it. Like, is there a pattern after band practice, like the headache increases, things like that? And then look at changing posture, positions, get them up and moving more. If they're not too attached to band, just maybe take a break from it and see if they do better. And then their activities as far as like sports and things like that, the highest risk would be dance, gymnastics, that sort of stuff. The quick movements, the whipping your head around, twirling, twisting, somersaulting. So the gymnastics movements, it's really, again, it's challenging for the neck to accommodate to the head being thrown in all these different directions. And so any sport that caters to that, especially in young girls that tend to be on the more mobile side and lack some stability, it's important to evaluate that and make sure that it's not too much, especially, and again, it's after practice, after rehearsal, whatever it is, they may have an increase in their symptoms, which tells you, okay, maybe dance gymnastics is really a problem here. Which leads me into the hypermobility. So if your son or daughter, and probably this is more common in females, so if your daughter has they're double jointed and they have all this flexibility, they're likely going to lack stability. And so what you need to do is be careful. They may be really good at, dance because they can put their foot in all these different positions, or their leg in all these different positions, or gymnastics because they can do all these twirls or curls. But ultimately, it could mean that their joints are under a fair amount of stress because their muscles can't necessarily accommodate to it. And so you'd want to make sure you're focused on strength, not just on mobility in these sports. And whether that's working with a trainer or just being aware of that in your son or daughter. Just know that no headache should be overlooked. So when your kids start having headaches, that is indication that there's a problem. It's not as if you can have a headache and it's like, oh, like the neck's probably fine because it's infrequent. Any sort of headache is indication that there's something under the surface that's boiling up. And it's probably been there for a while. You can deal with these problems for a while without having a headache itself. And so when you start getting headaches, that's a sign like, oh, we should get something, we should get some treatment. And so being proactive is best, especially in kiddos, because we see a lot of kiddos that will have infrequent headaches, and then it'll hit them and they'll just be like down, daily headache. and it'll be like this emergent thing that just stops life. And so we want to catch it before it gets to that point. So don't use the excuse of, oh, my kid will grow out of it, or although kids, they're resilient, like they'll figure it out. Like we want to take care of this and we want to address it. Kids are definitely more prone to daily headaches if provided with meds. That's kind of what we've seen. And so if we can avoid the medication, let's try that as well. And of course, as a parent listening to this, you're like, well, of course I'm avoiding medication if I can, but my kid, can't get out of bed. And so we totally get that. What we want to do is just find them the proper treatment. Now, of course, if you live in Colorado, come to see us, because we want to get you started with our process. And something that if you're local, you may not be familiar with, we have a 4-session guarantee. And so essentially we know that people have tried a lot of things, right? And so, okay, you're like, why would I jump into treatment here at Novera? I've tried so many things, they've all failed. Like, we get that. And pretty much everyone we see kind of feels that. And so what we want to do, we start with a free discovery visit, half hour, totally free. Like, we just want to qualify you, make sure you're a good fit. And then once we do that, we do the eval. And after the eval, we're able to really assess, evaluate, like, okay, does this make sense to move forward? And what does the plan of care look like? After the eval, we have 4 visits that in those 4 visits, like if you're a little skeptical still after the eval, in those 4 visits, if you get to the end of the 4 and you're like, oh man, like I really don't believe this is the place for me. These people like are selling me something that feels like a lie. Like, I'm going to repeat this waste of money that I've just gone down for so many years. If you feel that after 4 visits, like, we will literally give you your money back for those 4. And it's kind of like our bamboozled proof guarantee. We want to make sure that you feel confident with our process. And the thing is, we've never had anyone feel that way. And so it's sort of the thing, like, if we get to 4 visits and everyone feels confident and we're moving in the right direction, then yeah, we want to share that risk with you. We want to share the risk of, like, we don't want you to feel bamboozled. And so to make sure that you're protected and we're just not like trying to sell you something and you feel like, oh man, this is super risky, we're going to share that risk. And so it's not as if people, magically get better in 4 visits. It's a longer journey than that. But after 4 visits, you should feel confident. We should feel confident. And moving forward should be, something that we're excited about. And we know, like, hey, this is different. Oftentimes people do feel that after the initial eval. Oftentimes people find significant relief after 4 visits, which is just 2 weeks, which if you've been dealing with this for decades, if 2 weeks of treatment and you get some relief sounds amazing, yeah, book a visit. And especially if your kiddo is starting school and you're worried about headaches or migraines in the school, with school starting back up, don't wait any longer. Get them in here and we'll figure out what they need. Thank you all so much for listening to the Headache Doctor podcast. As always, it's our mission to educate and empower everyone with headaches and migraines so that you can break free from a life of fear of your next headache or migraine and dependence on medication. I'll see you next week.